Hey, what's up everybody? So I wanted to do another video and I wanted to talk about saxophone sound. Now to me, sound is the most important part about playing the saxophone, especially if you're a jazz musician. I think a lot of the romance of the music, a lot of the qualities of the music that we like come from the timbre of the instruments, the way that the piano sounds when someone like Bill Evans plays, very delicate, very light. The way that, the bass sounds when somebody like Paul Chambers plays, very thick and woody. And then the sound of the saxophone. And there are many great saxophone players who have great sounds. I think the sound is the thing that I've struggled with the most. And I wanted to make a video where I talked about my experiences developing my sound and what I kind of learned along the way. It's only really been in the last few years that I've become comfortable with my saxophone sound. When I was younger, I would get a recording of myself, like if I did a concert with my school's big band, or I did a recording session, or I even recorded something at home. I'd get the recording back and I just would recoil in horror. Especially if I started going up above like a G with the octave key, I would just hear those notes and go, ow. It really bothered me the way I sounded, and it took me a long time to realize like what I was doing wrong and how to fix it. And so today I kind of want to talk about like what I think the most important aspects of sound production are. There's really one thing that I think is more important than everything else, and I'll kind of talk about that as we go along. But I kind of want to talk about my journey through sound a little bit first. So I started when I was in high school really taking saxophone seriously. I started listening to like Charlie Parker. Was there sort of the first like jazz that I liked, but Charlie Parker plays alto and I needed tenor players to emulate. So I started listening to the usual. I think one of the first records I really liked was like Wayne Shorter, Speak No Evil. Like I heard that one and really enjoyed that one like right off the bat. And then I started getting into like Coltrane and Dexter and Sonny and all these other guys. And honestly, obviously, if you know me, the one I was most taken with was John Coltrane. He's still my favorite saxophone player. Probably the saxophone player, jazz musician, musician that I spend the most time listening to and trying to emulate. And the thing that I always loved about him is the way he sounded, the way, I would listen to even something like Blue Train. The way that his sound would hit you, like the first few notes of his solo, is like, it really spoke to me. Like it hits you right here. His sound is so full and projecting, and his high notes, I love the way his high notes sound. They have this cry to them, this vocal quality that I really liked. And for a long time, I would really compare myself to that. And if, obviously it's impossible to sound exactly like him, but I wanted to get that sound. And not only was I not getting that sound, I wasn't getting any sound that I liked. My high notes sounded thin and out of tune and sharp and bad, no matter what equipment I was playing or what I went through different mouthpieces and reeds and horns, and I found nothing that helped me. And it wasn't until a couple years ago, I was already out of school. I'd graduated with a bachelor's and a master's degree. And in my master's degree, I started to understand a little bit more about sound. I was studying with David Sanchez, especially for jazz, I should say. My undergrad was mostly classical, and that's kind of a different thing, but I think some of that stuff can translate over a little bit, at least with what I'm going to talk about here today, once I'm getting more in depth. But I studied with David Sanchez, who, if you don't know him, is one of the greatest saxophone players alive, and one of the greatest sounds. His sound is kind of in the same way that like Coltrane's sound hit me the first time I heard it. The first time I heard David, and especially the first time I heard him play like in person in a lesson, it was spellbinding, really. His sound is so beautiful, and if you've never heard it, you're definitely missing out. Get some water real quick. So this is where I was at. I wanted to sound like Coltrane. I wanted to have that immediacy of tone. I wanted to have that fullness, and I wasn't really getting it. I could get it like in the middle register, but my low notes I was always subtoning, and it sounded good. It sounded very romantic, but it didn't really, I was always kind of unhappy with that. And the high notes sounded like they sounded bad. Like I always felt like I sounded like a high schooler, even when I was, was like 23, 24. But when I was studying with David, I was starting to learn about sound, and he had me do these long tone exercises that were just absolutely brutal. Like holding a low D at 40 BPM for like 16 beats, like an insane amount of time, like for 4 whole measures, just absolutely, it was like being tortured. But I started to realize what I was missing about sound, and the big thing I was missing about sound, it wasn't equipment, and it wasn't even embouchure, it was air. All the time I had spent learning to play the saxophone in band class, in private lessons, in other areas, a lot of it was focused more on embouchure, which is important, but I think the real most important part about your saxophone sound is the air. If you're not producing enough air, enough volume of air, you're not going to get the right sound. You're not going to get the sound you want, and you're probably not going to get a sound that's very good. Now, the thing about saxophone sound, too, I should mention, is that everybody sounds different. You know, I could hand this horn to one of my students, and even if my students does all the right thing, they won't sound like me. You know, I could hand this horn to, I could hand it to David, and he would sound still like David on this horn. I can hand this to any number of my friends who play saxophone, they wouldn't sound like me. So sound is a very personal thing, and it's something you have to develop on your own through, listening, finding the players you like, and really studying them. But if you're not doing like the fundamentals, you're never gonna get beyond struggling, And that's what I was struggling with. I was listening to all the right players. I was listening to Dexter. I was listening to Coltrane, Sonny Rollins. I was transcribing. I was doing all this stuff. I wasn't blowing hard enough through the damn horn. Like that's just what it was. I wasn't making the reed vibrate. Cause what all those guys did in order to get the sound that they wanted is that they had to get all of the color and vibrancy out of this thing right here, which is the reed, that they could. This is true for everybody. Sonny, Coleman Hawkins, Lester Young, Coltrane, every one of them did this because, they were blowing the right amount of air, and the right amount of air is different for everybody else, different people. And for me, in order to get the sound I want, I need to really be breathing as deeply as possible, right? Taking deep, almost like, when I tell my students about this, I think, imagine you're going to jump into a swimming pool and swim all the way to the other side. That's how deep you need to breathe. You need to think about how much air you need to get across that swimming pool. That's what I do. So I deep breaths and a lot of what I call, like flexing of the diaphragm. And this is kind of obvious stuff. Like anybody who is a saxophone teacher, saxophone player, probably is already doing this. And, all the great teachers do talk about this. But something happened with me, and I don't know what it was, but I just kind of missed it. My embouchure was fine. I wasn't biting. By the time I was getting my master's degree, I wasn't biting. I had a good mouthpiece and a good horn, and everything was fine. I just wasn't blowing hard enough. And I didn't realize that's what was going on. And I thought I was. Like I was playing, I remember when I started my master's degree, I was playing I started playing like a Van Doren 8 with a number 5 reed, which was an insane combination. Because I thought that was the key to get the fullness I wanted out of the high notes. But I think, and this is kind of the ironic thing, is I think forcing myself to play a stupid setup like that helped me get the sound I want because I ended up having to blow harder, So you really need to make the horn sing, and the way to do that is to, use a full tank of air, right? It's the difference between these two sounds, right? I'm gonna do it the right way first, then the wrong way, and then the right way. So. And then you do, the wrong way. I played roughly the same thing. The first time, I took a deep breath. My throat was wide open. I was blowing a very relaxed breath, and I was pushing a fair bit. I wasn't overworking. I wasn't going like, like you're trying to blow out a birthday candle. It's more like, it's like a natural breath with just a lot of pressure from below. And the pressure, it shouldn't really be forced. It's very natural, because the way your lungs expand, it creates like a two-way pressure on these muscles down here. Your lungs don't just expand outward, they expand downward and backward. So what happens is it pushes on everything below with your diaphragm, with all this extra air. And so the problem I was having is I just wasn't doing that. And so you heard the difference, you know, and I'll do it again, right? What's the difference between these two sounds? Those were about the same volume, right? Like one was a little louder, right? I can make the second one, you know, just as loud. And it just doesn't have the same fullness. It sounds good. It doesn't even sound bad, really. But it just wasn't giving me that power and that feeling. Like when I listen to like Dexter Gordon, you listen to him play a song, you know, he can make that horn really sing, whether he was in the low register. And he had a very full, round, fuzzy low register. But he also had a very full upper register. His high notes were just as full as someone like Coltrane's, really. And, you know, really, Coltrane got his sound from Dexter and similar players. So, yeah, that was the big thing, was air. You know, really, that's the number one thing. Embouchure is like number two for me. I think you can get away with all kind of, especially if you're playing jazz. If you're playing classical, you should try to play with like the classical style embouchure with the lip rolled over and the firm, you know, corners and the smaller and all that stuff, right? That's true. This is not really about classical, although I guarantee you that if you listen to Claude DeLong or Arno Bornkamp or Tim McAllister, all those guys, they know how to do this. Like Joe Allard knew how to do this, you know. Harvey Patel knows how to do this, right? All those guys know how to do that, right? And that's probably where a lot of, you know, some players probably learn that stuff from guys like that. But when it comes to playing jazz and like shaping your own sound, for me, the embouchure I want is very loose, right? The only any kind of pressure comes kind of from the side, right? It's a very open sound, right? It's a low F. And the only thing I'm doing is I'm kind of pushing on the corners. I can even play with no teeth on top and still get that kind of sound, right? There, I'm actually using more pressure here and opening my mouth even more to get my top teeth off of the mouthpiece patch. And, you know, I'm still getting the sound that I like out of that. So really, the big thing for me that really changed was just, and it sounds so obvious to say, but I really wasn't doing this right, is I wasn't putting enough air through the horn. And I started to learn this when I got my P. Moriat. I have a P. Moriat tenor, and it's not this isn't it, but I have a P. Moriat tenor that I play a lot. It's a very big horn with a big bore, and even the action is like higher. Like the B key open, like if you looked at this horn, this is a Mark VI copy from like Eastern music or something. But like if you look at this key, it's not very high. But if you looked on my P. Moriat, it's like a little bit higher than that. It's like higher, and so there's more distance. So in order to make that horn sing, I had to really work. And you know, I've tried different kinds of setups and different kind of mouthpieces over the years. And I ended up coming to the same conclusions on all of them, actually. In fact, I have a few different ones here. I kind of wanted to show you today how, you know, you can get, if you do this, and this is the thing about equipment, and this is the next part of it. So embouchure, for me, let's just summarize real quick. So embouchure, for me, as long as I'm relaxed, not biting, and my throat is open so that I can blow and let the air do all the work, it doesn't really matter what mouthpiece I pick up, because all I have to do is make some very small adjustments to make it work. So this mouthpiece is an Auto-Link copy. It's marked as a 9, but it's really like an 8-star. It's like a 115. So it's a big opening, and it's a 2.5 reed. Big opening with a soft reed. This is a T7 with a large chamber with a kind of a medium reed. It's a number 3, right? So I'm going to put this on, and we'll just see what happens. You know, and the ballpark of sound, of tone, is not going to be that different. This mouthpiece is maybe a little brighter. This reed might be a little brighter and stuffier, but it's the same sound, you know, I'm getting the same sound, and that's what I want. The reason why I play so many mouthpieces, really, it has nothing to do with like searching. For a while it was, but now it's more like slightly different colors, right? Like this mouthpiece is obviously a little bit of a different color than the silver one, right? Than the Auto-Link, but it's not that different. I don't sound like a different player. You'd still would hear this and be like, oh, that's Banks. Right? I'm happy with that. So that's a 7 Van Doren. This mouthpiece is great. This on my P. Moriat is the best combination. That's what I like on that horn. Because that horn already has big action, so I don't like mess around with it too much. Now this mouthpiece is a Barry woodwind. It's not a Barry mouthpiece. It's by the company Barry. You can't really see it. It says Barry. It's a different mouthpiece. This is a 100, so it's like a 7. This is like a 105, so they're not that different. But this has a very small, I don't know if you can see it, very small chamber, right? I don't know exactly where it tunes. I'm just going to put it there. And this is going to sound a little bit, this is going to have a different character. But let's see, but you know, how different is it going to sound? Might be a little low, I think. Push that a little bit. The only thing that's really different between those two mouthpieces to me is like where the sound is going. The 7, the Van Doren, is kind of going like that in all directions, whereas this is going straight out, kind of forward. I can hear it bouncing off the wall on the other side of my living room. A lot of, you know, I'm playing on, this is a phone recording, so it's not really going to show a lot, but that's a cool sound. Now let's go to one end of the extremes. This is a very small mouthpiece. It's a Brillhart 5 with a pretty tough reed. Let's see what the sound is like on there. I had to take a second to sort of evaluate. So this one kind of has like a stuffy sound. It is a small opening, and the reed is kind of deadish sounding. It's not great. I'm not sure I would play this on a gig right now, but if I had to, I could, and I would get, you know, eventually the sound that I want just by adjusting, you know. And I've learned over the years just to adjust, and I don't think there's anything wrong with playing a lot of mouthpieces. I think it's okay, honestly. I mean, if you can afford it, there's no reason not to. As long as you're doing the right things with your sound, with your playing, it's kind of like, it doesn't really matter too much, right? I don't need to play a certain mouthpiece to be comfortable. There's some that I'm not so comfortable on, but I don't have I'm not married to one, you know? It's kind of nice, actually. It's kind of it's more fluffy, maybe more stuffy sounding than I might normally like, and that could just be the reed. But if I found the right reed, I could make this mouthpiece sing on a 4-hour gig, and I'd be totally happy. Also, it's easy to play because the tip is so small. Let's go back to the 9. I rest my case. It's all air. It's all air. It always has been. That's the biggest thing that if you want to get a good sound on this instrument that you need to be doing is blowing as much air through that tube to get this thing to vibrate as you can possibly manage. Cool. Thank you.